Welcome back to another episode of a podcast run by a software engineer. I'm your host, Perry, and today we're going to be talking about technical interviews. Yeah, it's a really great topic because a lot of people in tech does get affected into it, and it's usually, kind of like the gateway to get into the tech world. So really excited to talk about that. I'm actually joined with Andy and Stan today, and I'm quite fortunate because both of them are very well, involved into being on both sides of the technical interview, such as being the interviewer and the interview as well. So, hey, Andy, how are you doing today?
Good.
And Stan, how you been?
I'm good.
Yeah, that's pretty sick. So I was mentioning you guys are quite involved in terms of checking all the applications coming in, and I'm pretty sure in the past couple of years you probably have done a lot of interviews yourself, mostly technical interviews. I guess the first thing, what is your overall opinion on them? Do you like them? Do you hate them? You got any good words or bad words to say about it? What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, they're pretty solid. I mean, it kind of depends on what they ask. I typically like interviews that'll ask stuff that's related to job, not just some random lead code problems and stuff that are somewhat useless.
Somewhat. So you're saying that actual practical questions as opposed to being theoretically what this happens then. Mm-hmm. Yeah, hopefully most of the questions nowadays are like that, but I mean we'll discover more as we talk about it. But yeah, what's your opinion on it, Stan?
I think technical interviews are necessary, but obviously there's a lot of ways and different opinions on how to improve a technical interviews, how accurate they are in terms of assessing potential employees.
Yeah, that's true, because I mean I don't think there's one standard model that every single company uses at the end of the day. Just because even from my experience, from trying different job offers out there, I've probably done 6 different processes, and they're all slightly different. So
yep, that's
going to be really interesting to compare what we've gone through, and if we have any tips for other people going in, that'll be super exciting because they can only get better from that. But I mean we keep on saying technical interview. What is the difference between a non-technical interview and a regular interview?
I think at least in the interviews that I've had, usually there's the majority of the components were technical interviews, and those usually involve some coding exercise, system design, but usually maybe during lunchtime or something, oftentimes there's more of a behavioral assessment and just seeing how you kind of fit in, whether you know how to talk to people and stuff, make sure you're not too much of a weirdo. I think they call it culture fit, but I think it's more of a weirdo check.
Has somebody has somebody give you that flag before?
Yeah, I don't know if I've failed a couple of those. It's tough to say, but
Yeah, it's actually such a funny thing because you don't really hear about it outside. I don't know, that's my opinion, but outside of the Bay Area, the weirdo factor of somebody, you don't really hear about it. I don't know if it's a bias thing or whatever, but I think it's such a funny thing. I've never really watched the show Silicon Valley, but I'm guessing that they probably touch on that subject a little bit about
Yeah, that show they have a lot of different archetypes of types of engineers, and yes, a lot of them do fall in kind of the weirdo range.
Yeah, I was gonna say
more so than the average person that I've met in actual Silicon Valley, but that's just for the sake of drama.
Yeah, and I just tick every single box of it inside of it.
Yeah.
But that's actually pretty interesting, because when we're talking about okay, those are really good points, because when we talk about technical interviews, there's the the main focus is being technically able to do interview. But the thing is, nowadays I've seen a lot of other roles and even non-tech roles that are requiring some sort of take-home challenges or some sort of project or presentation to demonstrate that they could do their stuff. So is it kind of the influence where we keep on saying technical interviews? First it applied to most of the technical roles, but nowadays you're going to see other roles getting influenced by it. I don't know if you guys ever seen anything similar to that.
With take-homes, I think the main benefit of a take-home is that you have a larger time scale to actually prove that you're good at something. Oftentimes within a single hour, it can be difficult to show all the things that you're capable of. But
yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, Andy, what's the key thing that makes an interview a technical interview, I guess?
I mean that's basically it, right? As long as they're actually assessing your technical skills, that's basically a technical interview.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point at the end of the day. Well, at least we put some parameters into it. Just because technical interviews, so far we haven't really defined a specific example of a technical interview. We keep on saying how do you determine somebody's technical abilities? Well, most of the time, I agree with Andy to say that when it's practical, when it's something that the output is something that is you could use in real life use cases, like, oh, it gives you this amount of apples at the end. Like, it's probably not going to be apples, but you have like something concrete. That's I think that's something that we aim for. So as I was mentioning, a lot of us has done like, you know, different kind of technical interviews. Do you have any like memorable experiences or memorable ones that that you've done previously?
I don't know. I feel like all the interviews I've done were pretty average. I don't think I messed up too badly in them, or I didn't do like, you know, too exceptionally good.
I definitely have a couple that like stood out to me. Like some of them that were really good definitely were kind of assessed my ability at a more practical level. An example was like Stripe's interview was like I thought it was really good because it was like very practical. They gave you problems that you would have to solve like during your normal engineering, your time as an engineer, like on there. And there were some that were like kind of bad, but those were usually more of a case by case like interviewer basis. They were just like were kind of uncomfortable people to be around, especially when you're like asking for help and they're like kind of trying to get a little bit of help from them, and they were very dismissive and just kind of had an arrogant aura to them. I won't list companies there, but you know, those are some of the bad experiences.
I was gonna say, because there's a lot of factors into it. Then it's not only the challenge that needs to be like, you know, fun for it to be memorable, or like relevant for it to be, you know, giving a good score on it. You got to have somebody who's able to, you know, ask the question properly, or like somebody who's actually able to translate the goal of this whole process. Or else, like, what you end up focusing on the fact that the interview wasn't the greatest interview out there, that it kind of put less importance on the actual, you know, task at hand, which I guess kind of sucks, because for both parties you don't get a good assessment of like if the candidate is good and if you're able to actually hire somebody new. So, man, I feel like we're on a roller coaster in terms of whenever you start a like journey into an interview process or whatever. There's so many things that could go wrong, and like there's so many things that like will go up and down. So but I mean, for the people less familiar with what, you know, the whole stages of a technical interview is, I think it's a good point to like break down what are the different phases, I guess, just because if you look at it from a really big picture, you don't know each other. The company that you're applying to and you yourself, like, you have no contact between each other. So how in the world are you supposed to initiate this whole process? So I think the first stage most of the time is either you reach out to a company or the company reaches out to you, which is both very common scenarios. I think one is probably more common, is that one person will reach out to a company, than being reached out to. Because if you get reached out to, you probably have a lot of clout or something. I think
not according to LinkedIn. There's so many recruiters.
Oh yeah.
I don't think they actually care. They just want a number. They just want to add another applicant to their pile.
Gotta hit the metrics, dude.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah. The landscape has probably changed a lot since. Maybe I'm just living in the back in the days then. So, but yeah, I think the first phase of just, you know, getting into contact with the company and the candidate is definitely like phase number one. Phase number two is the introduction phase, where, you know, at some point you got to introduce what the context is, what the company does, what the role is. So like that's kind of like the clarification bit. And then when we get to like the third bit is the challenge phase, where we actually have, you know, either you send them a take home or you have an on-site. That's the phase where you kind of evaluate how they are on-site, or like how they think in person, how they think live, or if you give them a bit more time, how they tackle the problems. And then, you know, the last phase is like, if everything goes well, if nothing has, you know, fallen apart before then, that's the decision phase of, you know, agreeing, negotiation, and all that. Did I miss any step into that?
That seems to cover the majority, like the major phases.
That's pretty cool. And yeah, so I think what's actually quite important to you know, look at is the two different point of views. We got to look at from the point of view of the people hiring, and then the people that are going through the process, or like the applicants at the end of the day. So do you prefer this is just definitely more subjective. Do you prefer being on the interviewer side or on the interviewee side, Andy?
It's definitely a little bit less stress being the interviewer, because I already have the job, so you know, don't have that like hanging over me.
I actually like being the interviewee a lot of the times. I feel like you learn more. There are times where you learn stuff from as the interviewer, you learn something from the person that you're interviewing. But oftentimes those moments are rare, because like you should understand the problem that you're giving a lot better than they do, because you've spent a lot more time thinking about it and like thinking of all the various solutions. But
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point to point out because like the interviewer, a lot of times like you don't really know what the interviewee is gonna say, and a lot of your responsibility is to adapt and like keep on going forward with what they're working on, and then kind of if you have to guide them onto the right path, you gotta recognize that. As opposed to like the interviewee, a lot of times that like you'll have your own solution. Of course, you have to think about a lot of the different cases, but when you go onto a path, like you're the one on the path, and like the other person's looking at it, so. The balance is definitely there. I think from my point of view, I think especially in the past like year or so or like 2 years, I've done a lot of interviews. Well, I'm both done anyways, and I actually really enjoy interview questions. I think those are the questions that really like challenges real life scenarios because most of the ones I haven't really talked about my experience in all the interview stuff. I think one of the funner ones I did an interview for Medium. And what was I don't know the exact context, but one of them was basically just how they're storing a post like on the back end, for example. How are they representing, like how are they storing every single paragraph? How are they storing the edit changes from one version to another? And like I think the question was revolving around that, and the way to look at that was so interesting, and I think that's one of the reason why it was so memorable is because it was an actual case. Like Medium is a very popular blogging website and you can actually see the articles on it, but you never actually think about how is the information represented in the back end. So I remember doing that interview, and that was definitely very, very memorable. So that was kind of one of my favorite experience going on. And if we're going back to the question where it's like, do you prefer being an interviewer or interviewee, I think like it's very like moody sometimes. If you do like a lot of interview in a row as a interviewee, you kind of get fed up of it. Be like, oh, why can I ask the questions or whatever? But then they could apply the same thing for the other side, right? Or if you keep on interviewing people, like it kind of gets a bit dull, and like you kind of try to find a way to keep it interesting. I don't know if you guys agree with that kind of thought.
I think I agree. Like being interviewed is definitely, I think, for me, it's more exciting and more fun because you get exposed to like new things that you're not generally exposed to every single day, especially if they are good problems.
Yeah.
So if given that as an assumption, I think I prefer being interviewed. As the interviewer, there's a lot of stuff. It's definitely more stable. It's less nerve-wracking, especially after you've done like the same interview problem a couple of times. But there's always ways to like refine the problem, and as you like go through more, as you give that problem to more and more candidates, like you become better at giving out that problem. Like when to push people, when to back off, and it's like a very basically you're better at like delivering that problem and getting more signal out of the candidate.
But yeah, those are really good points because like I keep on mentioning this, but when was the last time you were interviewer and interviewee like at the same time? Like they're not like two mutually inclusive periods at the same time, unless what would happen I can imagine is that like you'd be interviewing people and like somehow you just like decide to move somewhere else or whatever, then you'd be doing both at the same time. So that would be the one case that would ever happen. But yeah, I think those are kind of like the different examples that we would have. Yeah, I think the other thing that I was interested, I don't know if anybody experiences or like explicitly been told you shouldn't be doing this, that when you're doing interviewer as an interviewee, so you're the one doing the challenges, has any of the interviewer told you like you shouldn't be sharing this question anywhere else? Or
I think some companies have NDAs, right, on like their interview questions, but then I mean,
I've never signed anything for that. Yeah. I think some of them have definitely, like the recruiters have emailed me, like especially for like take-home challenges where you post your code on GitHub and stuff. Oftentimes they'll ask you to make it private or something, or delete the code after they're done reviewing it. But for the on-site, I don't know if that's actually I've ever had that.
Yeah, that's the thing, because there's even for all the interviews I've done before, a lot of times I still have the code for it, and like I can obviously
I keep all the problems.
Yeah, that's another good tip, by the way. Like it sounds stupid, but guys, keep all the single questions.
Yeah, I write them down after each interview. Like after a phone interview, I'll write down the problem. I'll try to copy the code if it's in one of their text editors before I go. And then like the same thing for on-sites. Like I try to keep all the problems in my head, and then I write them down immediately after the interview. So I have them as like a problem bank.
Yeah,
for later.
you sound like a spastastic crazy person, but you should 100% do that. Like, you should definitely be keeping all of it. And it's funny because when you were mentioning like if the editor is still open, because I think HackerRank or maybe one of those like they time out after a while.
Yeah, they try to like get it so you can't copy the code. But
Yeah,
you got to be clever.
Just gonna put the trick out there is that if you inspect the element on
But
the
they
browser,
can see you selecting all the
Oh,
text
yeah.
in some of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
editors. It'd just be like, oops, Command A.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's like the live coding, so you can see that. But when it times out after, like I realized what you could do is that you could go on the browser and like remove the pop-up. You just like inspect it and remove the element. You can still interact with the editor, so you could definitely get the copy of whatever you code on it. So, actually, from my experience, I don't think it happened often, but they will explicitly tell you like, oh, please don't share this, like other. So like I think it happens, but not as common as it is. So there's nothing stopping me from like all the ones that didn't tell me that. I could honestly just open a GitHub repo and put all of it out there and like share it, which I might do.
Don't put your name on.
Yeah, exactly.
Like blacklist you. I don't know. Like well, people obviously do post those problems. Like you go on Glassdoor, you can read a bunch of problems, especially for like the larger companies.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's the downside of doing that? Actually, like, there's a reason why they tell you not to do it, but what's the downside for for you, for the company, for the perspective of the tech community?
I mean, the downside's only on the company. So like my opinion of like I guess the take home like solutions, like ones I've done, I usually just post them up on GitHub, like even if they say like not to post it, because like, it's work that I made, like it's not like who.
Do you write it's for this company's challenge on it?
I usually have like the company name in it, yeah.
Oh, you should remove
Well,
they
like
might blacklist you or something.
I don't post like the ask or the prompt or anything. I just post like the code by itself.
I see.
Yeah, but
So it
also
feels a little bit
like
different.
I don't think there's anything crazy about it, because what happens is, if they recycle the question for the next 5 years, well, it's kind of your fault. Like they shouldn't be relying on the fact that somebody might find it out there that the solution exists or something. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I'll take the devil's advocate like side and be like, okay, assume you're a company, right? And it's very hard to come up with good programming problems that have good signal on candidates, right? So once you do find a good problem, you want to be able to reuse that as a standard test across as many candidates as you can, because it's like a ruler, right, in terms of technical aptitude, and you want to make sure that ruler is ideally the same for every single candidate. And if someone comes in knowing the problem, obviously that ruler is going to be a little different than the people that came in not knowing the problem, right?
yeah.
So it's harder to assess like who's actually better. Like, do they actually clear the bar, or did they only clear the bar because they actually knew the problem beforehand? Right?
Yeah, I could definitely see your point of like defending that point, because if you look at any educational system, the same thing. If somebody has like the question to begin with, obviously.
Yeah, like standardized testing like companies, like people have gamed that entire market, right? Like for when you take the SATs, like a long time ago when people implemented standardized testing, they assumed almost all the candidates would go in with basically zero experience. Like maybe they would understand the format of the test, but they wouldn't have taken too many practice tests, right? But nowadays, like people have these standardized testing companies, and they just continually prep for like the same interview, right? And obviously they score much higher because of it. And now they need to like change the ruler they need to like change the measuring stick to account for these people that are constantly studying for a specific test, right? It's harder to get a standardized score.
There's actually so many points that we could like debate on this, because like what you're trying to describe, or I think what I'm trying to figure out is that when you have all these like standardized thing, or like the people that know the standard, that knows like, okay, this is just a plug in the exact same hole, every single same answer kind of thing, like that's kind of a mindset to it, then it forces the people who are actually giving out these tests to like be more challenging. And doesn't that progress as a group, everybody, as it goes? Or do you think there's more negative impact to that?
I think you just become really good at that specific set of problems, or solving those specifics. Like, let's assume all technical interviews were just graph problems all the time, like, and you didn't have to know anything else. You would just spend all your time studying graph problems, but that doesn't make you a good engineer, right? Like, there's so many other aspects of engineering aside from graphs.
Yeah.
So
is there? No, I'm kidding.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that goes back to graphs, but I would say there's a lot of other things outside of that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think so far what we've been discussing is that like there's so many different facets to interviews, but at the end of the day it feels like we're playing the interview game more than like challenging how creative, or maybe that's just my point of view, is that like every time you prepare for an interview, there's definitely the step where you would try to Google some of the interview question, and there's definitely the step where you want to, you know, try to find an answer already out there to be, you know, the top 5 most common interview questions. You know, like everybody does it. Even all the books are recommending to do that when you prepare for a technical interview. They're always telling you like Google it, try to find as many examples out there. And if you're lucky, the interviewer is going to ask you that question. So like people do it just because they know there's a chance of success on that. Like it will help you go through with the job. But then like from what we literally were talking about in the past 5 minutes, that like we shouldn't be doing this, as in like the coach shouldn't be sharing it too much just because everybody's going to get standardized and we're all just going to be expecting that one of these answers that we study might be showing up on the interview test kind of thing. You see where like this is my mindset from what we've been talking about this past, you know, couple of minutes. But I do agree that like the whole point is that from the company's point of view is that you want somebody not only that is capable of doing the current task, but also being able to be creative enough and to think outside the box and be malleable and flexible to, you know, tackle the future tasks coming in. Because a lot of times the tasks are not defined yet. A company's problem, we could have a new, you know, feature request in the next coming weeks and nobody knows how to do it, but you're very confident that the people that you hire are people that are, you know, capable of adapting and just going into it. So I think that's probably the important point, as you're mentioning, is that you want people to be able to, you know, flexible on that. I keep on saying those words, but that's probably at the end of the day. So that is sick. So now I think we're just going to dive in a bit where the first, I guess, point of view that we were talking about is that from the point of view of an interviewee, let's just go through the different phases, like even before getting to a technical interview. How do you even get a technical interview to begin with, if you know what I mean? So there's the application phase, or like the reaching out phase kind of thing. Yeah, I guess how does a person, individual, should go about to reach out to a company or like a role they're interested in?
I mean, this is probably like the easy step out of all of those, but then it's like, I don't know, job boards, go on like LinkedIn, just like submit a PDF of your resume to as many places as possible.
It's funny how you said PDF, as in like, is there a reason why we don't send like, you know, docs or like any other formats or anything?
Yeah, because sometimes if you have like Word docs, like it gets formatted. Like I don't have like word processor like on my machine. Like I just have TextEdit, so it just looks like a table of garbage when people send like docx files. So I think like the standard in the industry is to actually send PDFs, because almost every machine like renders the PDFs in a pretty similar manner.
Yeah, I mean, I had to point that out because I feel like nowadays I do see some people keep on submitting stuff with like just a editable like Word docs or something. Like, and I feel like the first time I ever wrote my CV or whatever, I feel like that was like one thing that came up and like, okay, so like you definitely got to do this. But I think it's a refresher for a lot of people that if you're sending it as Word doc, don't do that.
Yeah. Another important thing, make sure you have your keywords on there for whatever jobs you're applying. Like if you're applying for a backend, like make sure to list the backend technologies that you're, and even at this stage, even if you've just like tinkered with it a little bit, sometimes it's still good just to put that name on your resume or whatever technology, so it actually matches like the resume algorithm that like actually sorts through a lot of these resumes. Yeah,
it's a really good point how you're mentioning like there's algorithms and there's also the manual bit, right? So like there's a manual person checking the CVs, obviously. So from a manual person's point, from a person's point of view, it is good that if it's a technology that the company uses already and they end up seeing that on a CV, like the level of confidence goes up a little bit, right? It's to your benefit of putting that stuff out there. But at the same time, you don't want to put like 70 of them on it.
Yeah, I actually got a pretty interesting story about this. Like I read somewhere that someone basically created a PDF with like a bunch of buzzwords hidden inside the PDF to basically match all the algorithms that would sort based off of like, do they know Java or something? And obviously when a human starts reading the PDF, they don't see it. Like they just see like the actual technologies that they know. But basically it was a way to bypass all the resume sorting algorithms.
Yeah. Was it you, Andy?
I wish.
Yeah. That's a pretty clever way to beat the machine, right? If that's what they're looking for and that's all they understand. Yeah.
Wait, we got to step back for like a couple of steps here. Like, I'm pretty sure there might be people out there who are not familiar with this algorithm thing or like this, you know, why are we putting in keywords into CV? Can you just give us a little bit of like context as to what we're trying to...
Yeah, because human hours are really expensive and there's only like a limited number of human recruiters and they're much slower at looking at resumes than machines. So oftentimes for larger companies, they'll have like they'll have software that basically looks at all the resumes and does keyword matching. So if they're looking for a Java candidate, they'll make sure Java appears inside their resume at some point. And basically to bypass these filters, like you can do these little clever things to bypass them to make sure it actually gets into the hands of a human recruiter. After that point, they could also still just filter you out, but at least you made it past the first stage.
Yeah,
that's something.
It's a really good tip, as in like, because a lot of people don't realize this. A lot of people don't even know that. Do you think that more than the majority, if we talk about just the Bay Area, more than half of the companies use that kind of system? Do you think a lot of like the job boards out there have a built-in automatic filter like that, or is it the lesser common where they have automatic filtering for CVs and stuff?
I'm not sure. I'm not too familiar with ATSs. I've never really used them. Those are applicant tracking systems.
Yeah, actually, that was shouted out. I had another episode previously with a tech recruiter, and we talked about that a little bit. So that was actually really cool.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
tie back.
Yeah.
You should go listen to the other one.
Exactly. Thanks for the plug on that. But yeah, that's a really good point, because I was gonna say, I'd love to find out, if more than half of the companies use that kind of filtering system. But I mean, you don't lose anything for including some of those words in there to begin with. So I think that's probably one of the first tip that you mentioned that's really good, is that if you are building something, a CV or something to present to an opportunity that you're really interested in, check out what the technology is, make sure that what you're presenting to them is relevant to it, and that will definitely increase your chance at the end of the day. So I really do like seeing it from that point of view. And I think from what we were saying before, Andy was mentioning like a lot of like, you got to send out to job boards and all that kind of stuff. Do you have like a system that you could recommend people how, they should send 5 a day, or like they should send like 100 a day and see what sticks? Like from your experience, or even just in general, do you have any like tips to do that kind of stuff?
I mean, it kind of depends on like your experience level. Like if I were looking for a job right now, I'd probably be a lot more targeted. Like I'd probably be only willing to apply for jobs that I'm actually interested in. But then like when I was looking for my first job, it's pretty much just get as much applications out as possible. Like if you think about it, putting in an application takes no more than like 5 minutes. So in one day, you can probably do something like 100 or something like that.
I really like the fact that you mentioned like it depends on your stage, right? Like if you're straight out of college or whatever, and you're like,
people want you basically.
But then when you look at the opposite, like I could choose what I want now. Like, it's something very different.
Like a good engineer is hard to find. There's a reason why they're in demand.
Well, that's the thing. Like from an applicant's point of view, a lot of people get like frustrated after sending like 5 applications out that they don't get any success. And sometimes I'm like, are you serious? Did you just say 5? Like,
got a big ego.
Yeah. I know. Maybe like from my experience, that like every time I've always reached out to an opportunity, whatever, I had like a system where even 5 minutes, I think it's too long to fill out an application. If it takes more than that, then forget about not doing that. But on average, I probably send out like maybe 200 to 300 every time I've tried to like get a new opportunity. So
200-300,
like number wise. But the thing is like my contact was slightly different. Like for example, when I graduated and I was sending out all these applications, it wasn't just only in Montreal back where I lived. It was like these applications that I wanted to test around the world. So in terms of like my pool of opportunity that I'm interested in, it was like much bigger. So one of the mindset was, throw poop at a wall and see what sticks. And that was kind of like the approach. And like, even as somebody with not that many experience back then, you still get more chance of opportunities just because you're willing to throw out more stuff out there and see like, and then you get a bit of choice at the end of the day. So that's kind of how I saw it. But I think that was kind of my process, is just like throw many out there. You don't really lose anything other than the fact that if you apply like 500 times to the same company, and then they saw, I don't know if they actually track how many times you apply to it, but that might not be the best idea. But yeah, I'm interested what kind of system you have or had back then when you were doing stuff, Stan.
I think when I first started applying, I went like the shotgun approach. I was like, I'll take anything just to get in. I just want to learn some stuff. But nowadays I'm like pretty targeted. Like I want to spend time focusing and prepping for companies I'm actually interested in. I think last time I probably only applied to like 10 to 15 places, and that way I can like stay focused and just like spend most of my time actually studying, prepping for like these interviews.
That's actually great. Just because you can see the evolution of it at the end of the day. But the thing is, like, I still wouldn't be surprised if next time I ever do anything crazy like that. Like, I'm the kind of person that's like, there's nothing wrong sending 500 out there. And like, but then
if
again,
you have
like,
the time, like go.
yeah, I was
for
gonna
it.
say
Like,
time is probably the biggest factor.
yeah,
on that,
it depends on what you want to spend your time on. Like if you're confident you're gonna get one within, let's say 10, like, and you know all 10 of those are like companies you're very interested in. Why send another like 50 out to companies that you wouldn't really want to accept an offer from, unless the first 10 like didn't want you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could totally agree with that. The thing is, how do you choose these opportunities? As like we were mentioning, like there's different opportunities. The thing is, like a lot of it depends on if you're actually, you live up to the task, right? You can't just apply to something that is completely not your field and like you're not gonna be able to do it. So what are different like parameters? I'll give an example. Some of them require like 3-4 years of experience, for example, and then you clearly don't have that. My question would be, should you still try to apply for it, or should you just skip them and not consider that as a possible solution?
Well, I mean, you should definitely still try to apply for it because I think you wouldn't have any opportunities if you filtered all those out as a junior. I think every job requires 3 to 5 years of experience.
Yeah, there are very few. I think like years are generally kind of like a guideline on it. I know like recruiters sometimes they filter on it, but if you can get your resume in the hands of a recruiter and it looks really good, like, oh, all the technologies match, it seems like your experiences matches up with what they actually want in an engineer. I'm sure they'll, if you're like a year below or 2 years below, like, 3 to 7 years, but you still have done a lot of cool stuff, like, I'm sure they'll still pass you on to the next round.
Yeah, so that's one like I'd love to hear, or like even just to point out is that like, even if you think you're slightly underqualified in terms of like years or whatever, there's nothing bad in terms of trying it, just because, as you were saying, like if you present yourself in a really good way and then you could even like maybe punch a little bit higher than your weight at the end of the day, it might pay off. So don't stop yourself from,
Yeah, if someone's asking for like a senior role and you just started, like obviously that's not a match. But if it's like, if it's kind of in the gray area, like definitely go for it.
Yeah, okay, cool. Just wanted to point out there. Because I definitely have done that. I feel like a lot of times, like when I was checking out roles, like if I was missing like, a year or two, even though it's not the best indicator, still do it anyways, because I have been reached out whenever I did that. So I was like, it definitely paid off. So if you have any doubt, if it's a gray area, as Sam was mentioning, just do it. You'll be fine. Shout out to Nike. The other thing that is actually really relevant for like, people applying for tech job is the stack, I guess. As you were saying, when we were coming out of college or coming out of any education system, you don't really know what you want. You don't know if you want to be an infrastructure engineer. You don't know if you want to be a database engineer. You don't know if you want to be a web dev. You want to be any of that. How do people choose? Is the approach just like try to throw out as much as you can and see what picks you as opposed to what picks them? Or I don't know, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in the boat where you just like apply to whatever, like doesn't really matter what like the tech stack is or like the experience. Like it's really not your job to filter yourself out. It's the company's job. So just let them take care of that. Let them decide.
That's a good perspective. Yeah, don't filter yourself
Exactly,
out before they filter you out.
They're actually getting
There's
paid to
already so
filter.
many
Exactly,
filters.
yeah.
You don't need to do any filtering. That's their job.
Yeah.
That's actually quite funny. Yeah, it's the way I'm seeing this is that like it's because a lot of the technologies that I've used during university, like I did CS, right, and like we would be building a lot of stuff with like Java and a lot of stuff with like C and everything. I don't do any of that nowadays. Like a lot of the roles that I've ended up doing the past couple of years, that like if I relied on the fact that I'm only going to filter myself on the fact that I've done a bit of Java and a bit of like C during school, then I'm only going to apply to like jobs that only use the technology. My doors would have been closed by like a lot more than it has been. So I think that's something that I've always thought about, is that like, okay, you should be open to having the technology choose you at the end. I ended up being in web dev because I think that's kind of like the first few roles that popped up and like kind of fit with the companies were really cool and I really enjoyed it. So then nowadays I do a lot of web dev. But for the people that are, have a couple more experience into doing this, is that you shouldn't obviously close your door. Even though you've been doing web dev for the past couple of years, you shouldn't stop yourself from getting another role of, this stack is fully, Scala, for example. Then if you're really interested into it and the mission of company is that, go for it. That's something that I would always see as something as improvement to that. So that's, I guess, how I look at tech stacks and if you should filter yourself out to apply or not onto it.
I think especially when you're like a junior engineer, like I don't think like recruiters like need to look very much at like their previous tech stack, because it's more about, can they actually learn, like what's their level of aptitude and can they learn something. Even for senior level positions, I think you should still kind of keep that mindset that like you just want to hire really smart people. And if their experience like in terms of languages doesn't always line up, that's still fine, because oftentimes languages are easy-ish to pick up, or at least most of them. There's a lot of parallels between them. It's more about like coding fundamentals.
Yeah, which means that when I'm just piggybacking, sorry, off of what you're saying, is that when you're building a profile or something that you want to show people, like I guess the emphasis on the fact that you're able to pick up a new language, as opposed to saying that you're a master at a language to begin with, just because what you just described is literally that, is that like from the interviewer or like from whatever the recruiter's point of view, is that they don't expect the person to be already mastering whatever language it is. They want somebody who's able to, solve algorithms in any language. So the emphasis should definitely be more of that when you present a CV or anything that you're describing at the end. But yeah, dude, we spoke a lot about just the application phase. This is like not even like getting in contact with anybody, but if you kind of do those applications in these kind of way, and like from what I've seen, those you would get replies to it, and then that kind of brings you to the next phase, right? Where most of the time, if you've reached out to them, they will come back, and that's something that that you want to see at the end of the day. It's funny how Andy was saying that the easiest phase at the beginning was just sending out the application, because most of the time it's true, because you don't really lose anything, or the time sink is not in the application phase. The time sink is everything after. So the next phase we got is like the phone call stage, the initial phone call, where you get either directly from the hiring manager or the recruiter. How to beat that? Like how do you get a good first phone call? And got any tips for it?
I think it's kind of hard to fail this phase. Usually it's like a 10-15 minute phone call with like a recruiter, as long as you don't come off as like an ass and like you have like somewhat decent questions and can answer their questions to a certain degree. I've actually also had like recruiters at this phase like give like a very quick technical screen, where they'll just ask a bunch of different terms and see if like you actually know those terms. I think this was like from Coinbase or something. But usually this phase is like pretty short, and it's pretty easy if like you're semi technically competent.
Do you agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, you probably don't even need to be technically competent at this.
Yeah, that's true. Just don't be an ass.
I think from my experience, it's fairly, it's fairly the same. As like a lot of times, like when they ask questions, they're more generic questions. Like the recruiter would be like, "Oh, how did you hear about us?" Or like they'll ask very generic stuff. For me, it was kind of like some of the questions were about visas as well, so I had to obviously sort that out during that bit, or else it'd be going down the line. But there are the off case where some of them, the slightly harder ones, as you were saying, like they'll start throwing in these like slightly half technical question from somebody that you wouldn't expect them to be like technical. But the thing is, like a technical recruiter exists as well, so like that's a more subset of what's going on. But those were the kind of phase where it's like they will ask you questions in terms of like how do you like manage your work at the moment, or how do you manage your tickets, or some stuff like that. And like those are a little bit more in depth, but I feel like that's a smaller minority of the interview. I agree with you that if you know the fundamentals of like what your objective is, how did you find out about a company, how do you work if you're ready to describe it, and you don't sound like an ass at all in any of them, this phase should be pretty straightforward. I'm trying to think about any pitfalls other than being an ass, just so that something more concrete for people to learn off of. Is I think be concise. Don't speak more than not enough, because then you'll just be rambling on, and like it's a lot of information that might, I guess, not be relevant for the role.
Yeah, I feel like you have to talk yourself out of this. It's like they're just looking for any red flags, like, and if there are any red flags, like you'll be screened out. But otherwise, know your answers to like the questions that you said, like know how to describe your work, what kind of work that you're working on in a very general sense, not in like a technical sense, and you should be good.
Perfect. And then I wouldn't be surprised that after the first call from a recruiter, sometimes they will also set up another call with the hiring manager, which is probably somebody more directly involved in the team you're going to be working in. And I think it's fair to say that one is slightly harder than the first recruiter phone call, or do you guys have any reason to think that it's just as, doable as the first call?
I forget if I have too many of these calls. I definitely remember the calls with a recruiter. I think a lot of times, sometimes there's a hiring manager, but usually it's kind of an expansion on the questions that the recruiter was asking.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe it's similar, but it's a person that you might be interacting with more, so maybe take it more seriously.
Well,
if you do get hired, you don't want to come off with a bad impression with someone that you're working closely with.
Definitely don't be an ass to that person.
Yeah, so don't be an ass, but definitely don't be an ass to the next person. To the because I think they also determine your comp, like at the end if you do get an offer. So
I mean, that's not important, right? That's actually, I'm glad you pointed out.
Double down on the don't be an ass.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad that every phase before this, it's fine if you be a little bit an ass. But like at that point, no, not a bit anymore. But yeah, I just pointed that out because I think it happened a couple of times when I was doing like the first initial, contact phase. I've had the recruiter, and then I get another phone call from a hiring manager, and I wasn't expecting it. I thought it was going to go straight to the challenge, but it was just another phone call. I'm like, oh, all right, well, I'll have to, make up more stuff. Well, not make up more stuff. I'll have to like describe more of how I work and a bit more, relevance in terms of like technology stack, how you work in a team with other engineers and all that. So that's usually what the second phone call would be, is how they see you like actually day-to-day life as an engineer. Do you use Stack Overflow a lot? Do you Google a lot? Most of the time, I feel like if you say yes to those questions, it's a good sign. That's how I would see it. But I mean, a lot of people could debate about that. But what's actually juicy though, the juicy bit is that if ever we go through these stages so far, the application and then the initial phone calls and everything, if all that goes well, most of the time you will be sent a challenge, whether it's a take-home or a on-site. Do you guys have a preference in terms of like take-home versus on-sites? And I guess for the people who don't know what's the difference, what exactly are the two kinds there?
The take-home's usually just like a technical challenge that you do on your own time. Like you have like a limited amount of time to do, like 2 hours or something. And the on-site is the last stage. I think I prefer just like the shortest interview process possible, and the on-site is definitely the required part of it. So from that, I like the on-site better. I don't know.
I think like usually from what I've experienced, it's like a take home or like a phone call to solve like a small coding problem. And sometimes there are time take homes, and sometimes there are like more like time open-ended take homes. Usually I'm with Andy. I usually prefer like anything that's shorter. Like if it's like a large take home, there have been companies that I just stopped their process because like I didn't have the time to, or I didn't want to invest that time into like a company's problem that, maybe they were like lower down on my list of priority companies that I wanted an offer from. In terms of like the on-site, that's usually like a required portion of most modern day technical interviews. I don't think people really skip those these days.
Yeah, it's funny because like there's a lot of there's combinations, right? There's, as you were mentioning, we could have either one, or we could most of the time only have the on-site because that's probably the more crucial bit.
Yeah, sometimes people skip like the take-home and the phone calls. I think especially if you're like slightly overqualified for a position, maybe they'll just bring you directly on site if you had like a good conversation with the hiring manager or recruiter beforehand. And
from the interviewee's point of view, that's like definitely to your advantage because you just skip a couple of phases and like
it's less time.
Yeah, I think time is a really good factor. I've had different like cases where the take home, for example, one of them was like 2 hours, so I had 2 hours to do a take home, so they'll tell me on that. But then another time you would have like, oh yeah, just send it back to us in like a week, or like send it back to us in like
open-ended ones.
So the thing is like, I kind of see the appeal. It counts as a filter to see if you could already assess how they make their project or like what they code in. That's already a good indicator. But the thing is like, if you give them that much time, there's totally a chance for them to be like, oh, can I just get somebody else to do it for me? Or you know what I mean? Like, so I've seen that happen for the take homes where it's like, it's not as accurate if you're going to give that much time to somebody.
I think that's why we have a time limit on ours. It kind of prevents more cheating.
Unless they're very efficient.
Yeah. I mean, technically, even with 2 hours, you could find someone to do it for you, but it's probably kind of difficult once you ask your friend ahead of time.
Yeah. I want to give a couple of examples of like what kind of take home do you have. So one that I've received a while ago is I was writing some UI components, and I think one of the challenges was basically it was like a bank UI kind of thing, and we had to figure out like mortgages and numbers has to like change depending on who's loaning and all that. That was a take-home challenge I remember, and the thing is like they don't specify more than just like the initial task. So like they'll be like this UI needs to do this, but then they won't specify like, oh, you got to write tests, you got to write all that kind of stuff. So I think from my experiences, the ones that I've felt like I've done well is that like you always do a little bit more than you should have. I remember writing like React tests on top of like the requirements just because, you know, why not?
Yeah,
The take
you gotta show off.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's basically what I'm trying to say is that like during that take home test, that is like you have more than enough time to be showing off if you have, you know, more time to do it. So that's basically, I guess, my experience is that if ever I did do a take home that I thought was worth the time, I would definitely do more than enough. But I have seen take homes that are so massive that take so much time, and I'm like, what? Why? Like, why am I doing this? And a lot of times it just.
I had one that was pretty open ended. It was like an orchestration platform, and if you can imagine, that's pretty generic. Like, it's like I don't know if you guys are familiar with Airflow, but it was basically like try to implement like a basic version of like Apache Airflow, which is like a workflow orchestration.
So did they actually give you like concrete data to work with, or are they just like
no? They're just like, I want to see like if you can build like. I think this was more like a problem around if you could think very abstractly and like very generalize like a problem, like make something that's like abstract enough to be used in like a lot of different cases. But yeah, they're definitely like very open-ended problems as opposed to like closed-ended ones. One was like there's a bunch of it's like a multiple sources of temporal logs, and then you have to sort them across multiple. And I think like the solution was like implement like a heap when sorting the logs from different sources.
That makes sense. Because I feel like a lot of the times, one of the other one that I've seen is like, oh, build a web scraper. Like I think it's
yeah, I think I've seen that one.
Yeah. And the thing is, like I've seen that in multiple different companies as well. So like as far as I know, like it's quite a popular one, I guess. So if anybody is trying to prepare for anything, that might be a good one. But yeah, as I was literally just mentioning preparing. How do you prepare for like either a take home or like an on-site? What are some of the things that you know, future prospects should be looking at?
I think it's good to ask a company about like what the on-site or technical or the take-home stuff is about, because like they're usually willing to actually give you information, like a little bit of detail. It's kind of like give you a study guide, but then you're not going to get that information if you don't ask.
Yeah, that's true. I usually don't prep too much for like take-homes and like the initial phone calls, just because I just find like it's a better use of my time to spend that time like prepping for on-sites. In terms of how I prep for on-sites, usually I try to solve a few problems in the morning before like I go to the interview, and prior to that, on a larger time scale, I try to like do like CTCI and problems and whatnot.
That's actually a really good, just to get, you know, the mental math going, or like the mental juice going before
yeah, you don't want to go in cold sometimes. Yeah, you gotta like mentally warm up a little bit before you go in.
It's really popular nowadays where there's loads of resources online to you know, interview questions or whatever. Do you guys have any like ones that you've used before that you found was quite cool that, you know, deserves a shout out or something?
LeetCode, right?
LeetCode's pretty good.
Which one is that, sorry?
LeetCode?
How do you spell that?
LEET code.
I've never heard of it. Am I?
It's a pretty common platform. I think it's made by Gail, the author of CTCI, like cracking the coding interview, I think.
So how interactive is it though? Like, is it just a list of questions that you do on your own, or is it actually like it gives you a pretty UI that lets you type into it? Or
well, it's not a pretty UI, but it's there's a lot of different problems. They get categorized like easy, medium, hard, like so you can go through and like solve. Usually, I think there are like certain time limits that you want to hit, like when solving these problems. Like you should be able to solve like a medium problem in 20 minutes or something. To be able to solve like a hard problem in like 45 minutes. And I know different companies definitely pull their problems from that set of problems, but it's a very large set, so they kind of fall more under like the toy coding problems type problems. They're not really, there's some system design problems in there, but I think mostly people use them for like algorithm type problems.
That's pretty sick, because I mean even me working after a couple of years, I've never heard of it. I'm like, oh, maybe I should check that out, because it could definitely help. But even when we're talking about people who don't even have that much experience to begin with, that is probably a good point to start with, because then you'll be exposed to, the way to think about different algorithms, and all that. But I agree with you that nowadays, if you've been working as as a software engineer for a couple of years, you don't need that much time to prepare, because a lot of the stuff that you do daily reflects what you should know, like the algorithm implementing all that. So I kind of agree that it doesn't require as much boot starting. You could start cold from like a shorter period of time than previously on it. But yeah, I think in general, like most of the preparations is basically that. It's one of the other one that I remember seeing online, I think it's like Euler's Problems or something like that. It's a website that basically has a lot of these algorithm questions where it's like implement like factorial or something, or like they'll ask a lot of like questions on computer sciencey theories. My question is probably like, I did a CS degree, so I feel like I'm very fortunate to be able to been exposed to these kind of stuff. But for the people that don't have that kind of background, that study that in school, and you're getting thrown these like prep questions, how should you go about it, just because you don't have the educational exposure to what a recursion is, or what currying is, or what a functional programming language is? Like,
I mean, I think if you're looking to be an engineer, even if you don't have a CS degree, you should find some way to learn that stuff. It seems like a core it seems like it's like a core fundamental. I don't know. There's a lot of resources online. You can like watch videos of like actual CS classes and stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that have taken the non-traditional path, like if they want to be good engineers or they have a desire, oftentimes they'll like me, like I feel like I scammed my way into a job, and then afterwards I backfilled that into the knowledge I was missing. But that backfill portion is important if you ever do want to like become better. Like you can't just be, you can't code without understanding data structures.
Trust me, I got a CS degree, and I do the backfill as well. So as far as I know,
everyone should backfill the information that they're kind of missing.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good. And I just want to go back to one of the point when Andy was saying that, like, if you actually ask for the what the structure of the onsite will look like, or what the structure of the take home will look like, that 100% is, I feel like it's a must do nowadays. If you want to have a good chance of going into it, because a lot of times people are more than happy. It already gives them an impression to them that you're willing to reach out and get your own research, all that kind of stuff. So that's good. And most of the time they have broken this down, because if you're looking at on-sites specifically, there's multiple steps on an on-site. It was rare for me to see an on-site that doesn't have multiple steps. So they'll usually, if ever they have sent you a take-home, they will ask you to review your take-home. So they'll kind of ask you to describe why did you implement it that way, kind of thing. So that's one of the steps I've seen when they do during an on-site. Another thing that they would usually do during an on-site is ask you probably to expand what you did at your take-home. So that kind of validates the fact that you were the one that kind of worked on a take-home, and you're able to actually do work that's relevant to what's going on over there. And what are the other stuff that they would ask you during the on-sites?
I think that usually gets broken down into like a couple categories. Like usually there are like they're closer to toy problems, but I think people, as they become better, companies become better at giving out more practical problems. Usually they're like toy problems that you can do. They're like, it's easier to grade at like a graded level, as opposed to like you either get it or you don't. So there's like room for expansion and doing well on the problem if they finish parts of the problem earlier. There's always like another part of the problem to solve. So those are kind of like the toy problems that I find. And then there's like more, usually I get like 2 or 3 of those. And then there's like a system design one. And the system design one usually tests like your general knowledge coding, like whether you've actually coded stuff up in like a scalable way, whether you've set up systems in an orthodox way that actually works. You can see like how happy people are usually in that stage. And then there's the behavioral part. And that doesn't really fall under technical interviews, but
are they a weirdo?
That's what are they an ass? And that one you definitely don't want to be an ass on either, on site.
Oh yeah, that's also a very standard technical interview term, by the way. Are they an ass? Like,
yeah. Yeah, again, I think they call it culture fit, but
Oh my god. And there's another thing that actually people talk about a lot during onsites is whiteboard versus actual coding. Do you have like a preference on, doing one versus the other? Do you prefer just having a whiteboard and going at it, or do you actually like having a computer and tap 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 and show the actual code?
I prefer the whiteboard because the code doesn't actually have to run. So it's like your performance is basically tied to how good the other engineer is, like your interviewer. If your interviewer is bad and doesn't understand the code, then it'll make it a lot easier for you.
Andy with the real talk, man.
That's true. I've definitely felt that. Like, I still think I have a slight preference to coding, like on the laptop, just because I'm more used to it. But I do like whiteboard interviews just because of the fact that you don't get bogged down in the details, right? Just because it doesn't compile. If like the primary parts of the logic make sense, then it passes. And of course, if your interviewer is like very good, like you'll still need to solve like those detailed parts, and that might make it slightly more difficult if you're not as good as them in debugging your own code, because it looks really bad if you can't debug your own code before like the other person has. Yeah.
And I think the I don't know what's my preference. I feel like I'm more of a whiteboard person at the end of the day. Like I like
a big picture guy.
I think you've seen me done that a lot. Like a lot of times I just draw stuff like nowadays. And it's not even just because I want to like ace an interview. It's because I literally just draw stuff all the time anyways whenever I do anything. So big boxes, big fonts, that's my kind of lifestyle. There's a common tip actually. I don't know if you guys heard this, but whenever people prepare for technical interviews, they say that you should be talking a lot. You should be explaining your thoughts as you go. Do you think it's advantageous to do it or not? I'll give myself as an example. When I do on-site interviews and I go through a bit of code, I tend to repeat stuff. Like I tend to look at stuff, and if I'm stuck at something, I'll repeat the question to myself. And sometimes the interviewer will be like, "Why are you asking the question again?" I'm like, "No, sorry, I'm talking to myself, just so I know that I'm asking the same thing." Do you think that it's
You're rubber ducking yourself?
Literally. Behind the screen, there's actually a rubber duck as well. Be like, yeah. So I was gonna say, do you think it's advantageous for the interviewee to be actually speaking out loud the thought process as they're doing the onsite?
I have a correlation just with my interviews. I think people that talk too much generally do worse. And it's just a correlation. That's not to say like you can't talk a lot and do well, but oftentimes people that talk a lot generally do worse. I think maybe they're having a hard time like just structuring the thoughts in their mind. I think if you talk too much, it almost like conflicts with you just sitting there and thinking about the problem a little bit. I think some people that feel really nervous, like they'll just talk too much, and sometimes it's better to say nothing if you're just going to say a bunch of wrong stuff. Like it's easier for me not to mark you down if you just don't say anything, as opposed to if you say like incorrect things, right? But I think there, obviously, if you do want to talk enough when you do get stuck, right? So I think it's good to like have a medium there. Like talk when you are stuck and converse with like the person interviewing you. And oftentimes interviewers, like they want you to succeed. Like they want to find reasons why you're good enough, right? Don't think of them as like the enemy.
Yeah.
So, and they'll oftentimes answer a lot of the questions that you actually give them. So, human nature kind of just.
Do you see that kind of happening quite often for you, Andy?
Kind of this. I don't know. I think talking a lot is good. I think you actually try to talk as much as possible. Like obviously, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say it. But then like,
yeah, don't talk yourself into a corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because Andy just doesn't listen to the interviewee anyways. They just talk and Andy's like, yeah, sure. No, you're definitely thorough with what you hear and what you do whenever you're sitting on those, and then like they start talking. Like if the interview, from the interviewee's point of view, if you know you're saying stuff that is constructive and it helps you get to the next step and it helps you justify why you did the previous step, I think it's more than good that you're saying them out loud, because sometimes when you're looking just at the code, it's not always obvious to see why did you put this here, why did you define it this way. So the talking bit, I guess a lot of it is just so that you could justify or like strengthen what you did if you are going the right path. If you were going the wrong path and you strengthen this path of like really bad practices or whatever, that might not be advantageous at the end of the day.
I actually think it's the opposite. Oftentimes, like if you're doing the right thing, like I know why you're doing the right thing. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt if you don't say anything and you're doing the right thing, because it looks right. But if you're trying to like justify something that's wrong, obviously that's bad. But also when you're running into issues, like you should talk more because you actually need help more, right? And the interviewer is there to actually assist you through the process. Like they can ask you leading questions to kind of put you back on like the right path. But if there's so much signal and you're just constantly talking, I don't actually know when to say anything to actually help you, right? Like I don't know, it can also be hard to interject between like your thought process to give you helpful advice. Yeah. So that's why I think like sometimes talking too much might not be like that great for you as an interviewer.
I totally agree with that, because I was just about to say that like some people might find it not embarrassing, but like they feel like they shouldn't be asking like dumb questions. Not dumb questions, but like they shouldn't be asking questions. They shouldn't be asking for help. As in like as an interviewee, they feel like if you ask for help, it shows that you don't know anything and like you shouldn't do that. But the thing is like you were really making the emphasis, whereas like the interviewer is there to obviously to assess it, but if they see that they're able to talk to you and see that you're able to listen what they're saying and then click in your mind the next step, you're like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense, and then you just keep on going on your way after that.
That's a huge pro. Yeah,
that like I've seen that happen, and like it's 100% a bonus. So don't be afraid to ask questions, but obviously avoid asking like the really 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 dumb questions. But I think like as we were saying, like you wouldn't get too much like I guess points docked from not knowing a specific feature of a language. I guess like if you didn't know a language couldn't do specifically this whatever assignment or whatever, like I don't think that's a big minus most of the time. Most of the interviewers are very aware that you're not going to know every single possible feature of like JavaScript or whatever. So
yeah, it's like a plus if you know like all the esoteric things of a programming language, but if you don't, that's fine.
Yeah. All right, so that's pretty cool. I think we've wrapped up a lot of stuff in terms of like the actual challenges as we go. I think ideally after this point, if you've done really really well and everything, you'll get some good news after it. And the good news is most of the time would be an offer, some positive approval of the company that says, oh, we definitely want you on board, and like there's more discussion talking. I think this is more politics now. Like when you get to that stage, a lot of it is politics. What I'm interested actually in hearing your opinion is how do you tackle this phase? How do you tackle a phase of, okay, you received a good response from them after you've done all the challenges and everything. What is your immediate thought after that?
After you've received an offer?
Yeah. After receiving your first offer.
Your first offer. Well, usually you want to have multiple offers on hand, because that's when like negotiating actually becomes powerful. If you have one offer, usually, if you don't want to lie, usually you should wait on other offers. And you can usually tell the first company like, oh, I'm waiting on some other companies, and they'll probably try to pressure you in terms of time, because that's their job, to make you accept their offer before you have any other ones. Yeah,
it's funny how I said first offer. Like I kind of meant first offer from that one company, as in like an offer could give you multiple offers. Or
I assumed you'd get one offer from the company.
Well, I mean, that's not always true though. It's like you could have absolutely flubbed the company and then do that.
We'll give you like a lower ranking job or something.
Okay, we're not gonna hire you for this, but we'll hire you for
the janitor.
But it is, thank God that you pointed out the fact that you should be doing a lot of these interviews like in parallel. You shouldn't wait till the outcome of one company and then start the process of another company. A lot of these, when we're sending out applications, you should be doing a lot of them at the same time. I'm not surprised for somebody to be doing like 5 technical interviews 5 days in a row, just to be efficient to do it. So I'm glad you pointed that out. But yeah, in terms of like, different parts of, if you're happy with the offer, the first offer, obviously you take it, you're going to be happy with it. But is that
never
like,
be happy with the first offer. Always go back.
Has that always been your experience, Sandy? Or like, what was your take on after, hearing good news from post challenges?
Well, the best thing to do with an offer is to do nothing with it at first. So just like sit on it for a week, kind of play like hard to get.
Do they let you sit on it for a week? What do you usually tell them?
I'll just tell them that I'm thinking about it. It takes a lot of time.
It takes a week to think about it?
Yeah, I mean, like a job is a big deal. That's like a whole third of your life.
That's true.
Dude, yeah, I 100% agree with what Andy was saying. Also, just because of the fact that like a lot of times when I change job in a different country. So like,
that's a good reason.
I have the excuse of like, okay, give me some time to think about it because I got to uproot a lot of stuff. I don't know what your excuse was, Andy, but
it's a big commitment. A job is huge. It's like straight up a third of your whole life. So
all right, maybe I'll try that next time. Like I usually say I'm waiting on other companies. I need to see what their offer is before I can make a decision, and usually they'll try to.
I like Andy's approach because he doesn't explicitly say it either.
That's actually pretty good, because I think when I say it, the recruiter feels pressure. They're like, oh, another offer is going to come in. Like, I got to tell them there's only 2 days left. Like, and then I get time pressured to like accept or reject the offer.
Yeah, and he's just chilling. He's on his throne, just playing.
I got to think about that one. That one's... I like that philosophy. Say less.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're doing this. So... and then like after that happens, when you wait for a bit, or when you kind of have the first initial talk, then that's where like the second dog happens, the conversation happens, right? Because when you get given an offer, that's like kind of like a monologue. That's what they're saying. We're going to give you this, we're going to give you that. But then when the conversation happens, that's when you kind of get the say to be like, are you happy or not happy with it? How do you gauge that? How do you feel? How do you come back in terms of like putting yourself in a better spot without completely blowing it out of park and not having the offer crumble at the end of the day?
What do you mean by offer crumble?
As in, like, if you come back with something completely outrageous and they're like, nah.
Usually they just say no, right?
Yeah, it's like it's very difficult to get a company to pull back their offer.
Yeah, they just won't like acquiesce like whatever you're asking for.
That's actually a really good mental point, as in like by the time you get to this point is that like you've cleared so many good points and so many approvals that you're kind of a bit in the driver's seat, right? You should have the confidence behind you. I feel like it's really hard to say for somebody that's gotten their first offer like straight out of school and like they see this and like they don't really realize that they're in the driver's seat at that point. But also it's not completely true, because what happens if like they have multiple of more junior people coming in, and like if you don't accept it, then they're willing to take the risk to get another one, or they have other candidates that are waiting if ever the first one doesn't happen. So
yeah, I don't think people really neg on like offers very often from the company side, unless they find something that's like very suspect.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I didn't fully realize it, that like for the people that have a couple of year experience, is that if you've cleared all these challenges, you're in a good spot. Like you're more than happy to have this conversation, and I feel like you should, no matter what. At that point, you should be, put your thoughts out there. Don't say too much, as we were talking about this whole time, but definitely mention at the end. And I think a really good point is that by this point, you're actually talking to the recruiter again. You're not really talking directly to the hiring managers or any of the engineers that interview you during that point. The question for you, I guess, for you guys, do you think the recruiter has that much power in terms of like deciding how much more you could get? Or
I think the hiring manager has all the power. The recruiter might just be like the voice piece of the hiring manager.
It's actually so funny. I don't know if it's true. I've spoken to different recruiters, and I feel like some of them do say that they do have an influence on it. As in, like, a recruiter could make a case to make it easier for that, maximum or whatever you could get out of it. So,
So double don't be an ass to the recruiter as well. Yeah. I always assumed they just kind of parroted whatever the hiring manager said. They just kind of were like the proxy between you and...
Dude, I'm telling you about the messenger. The messenger could like report another message at the end of the day. So
this guy's an ass. Don't give him a higher offer.
So, I'm glad we're debunking all of this. So, but yeah, I think that usually concludes like the whole loop at this point. If you manage to have a really good conversation at that point and everybody's happy, all the parties are happy, and you get a acceptance, then everybody's happy. I just say that is that you're happy with what you got, and then the company's happy, obviously, because they made a decision on you, and then you could keep on working building off that. But I mean, not to say that the opposite happens sometimes, that you just can't agree to an agreement and stuff falls apart and nobody gets hired, and then you go on your own merry way. So I guess that kind of closes the loop in terms of like the interviewee's point of view. We're just gonna have a quick one from the other side, from an interviewer's point of view, of quick easy steps to make what makes it easier for an interviewer to go through the stage, because as we were mentioning, it's very time sync for both parties. For the interviewer, you're going to look at this where it's like, oh, I got to plan this whole thing out, where I got to go to the on-sites, I got to do this take home at home and everything. But there's also quite a significant time sink for the interviewer or like the hiring company, just because what was the number that I think we mentioned back ago? It's really expensive to hire an engineer because of how much time the companies sink to recruit them and like reach out for it. Was it something like 20,000 for like a Bay Area company?
Like tens of thousands per engineer.
Yeah, to hire an engineer. So not even for like paying them their salary to begin with. It's like just a process of counting the hours and everything. So I think it's good to put a little bit of color in terms of why a company finds it so difficult to hire somebody, or like finds it so hard? Why is it so expensive to it? So I guess from the point of view of an interviewer in the first recruiting phase, whatever, what would be something that I guess they're looking? I mean, we talk about the filtering bit, where it helps them to save a bit of time, just because if the technology is not right, they're not gonna reach out, and it's gonna save them a bit of time. Is there any other way for an interviewer, or like a hiring manager or a recruiter, for them to be more efficient at talking to potential candidates?
Like when they're sourcing candidates, or what do you mean?
Yeah, I think it's more like, I mean, it's easier for us to probably see it as like a technical hiring manager. What kind of questions could we ask interviewees that will instantly be like, no, we don't want them at the end of the day? As you're saying, like, because I think like when you're pointing out like, oh yeah, don't be an ass kind of thing. Like there are questions that like they ask to make you kind of gauge for how they do. I think the biggest like X, or like the biggest red flag, is like if the hiring manager asks something about not how do you work in a team? Not being a team player is probably a big red flag a lot of times from what I've seen. So I think that's one of the examples I would have put in there in the first reach out phase from a hiring manager. That's one of the questions that I personally would ask somebody to gauge how their teamwork is. So I don't know if you guys have anything similar to what I was trying to say there.
If I was like a technical recruiter, I think like oftentimes I can get a lot during like the first 10-15 minutes of the 5-10 minutes of a conversation with a candidate, when I ask them to explain their projects, because oftentimes how much in depth they go, like what things they decide to focus on, tell me a lot about what kind of engineer they are. Sometimes they focus a lot on like the product details, and I realize they're more of like a product. They want to make sure I understand like the product specs before they like dive into the technical details. And when they do dive into the technical details, sometimes they don't get very far. So I know like, okay, maybe they weren't as involved in like the architectural side of the product. So but most technical engineers or technical recruiters aren't actually truly, they don't have technical backgrounds. I think like they're recruiters that specifically recruit technical people, like software engineers. So I don't know if that experience is like too relevant for them, but they might have like a softer version of that when talking to candidates.
Yeah, I like that a lot actually. Do you have any like questions that you would ask, like if you put your thinking cap of like a hiring manager, is there any good questions that you'd like to ask Andy to prospects?
Probably just the same ones that Stan just mentioned, like to talk about like their previous experience. If they're not able to talk about it well, then that's like a huge red flag. Like, did they even do that stuff? Or
it could be like a communication issue sometimes, or it could just be, maybe they just didn't do very much.
Yeah, and those are definitely indicators. Like,
yeah, both not very great indicators, but you take that as like some signal and combine it with the rest to get more of a fleshed out picture.
Yeah, that's true. Candidate. I think one of the questions I could rip off from a hiring manager that I've been asked once, and I feel like if I ever get the chance, I'll definitely ask people, is what is your take on doing things right versus doing the right thing?
Wait, I gotta think about that one.
Yeah, so like it's actually, I don't know, like
doing things right
versus doing the right thing.
Can you describe the difference?
So yeah, red flag because you don't know what's the difference. Not hiring your ass, you're done. That's all actually right. Like it was funny because like it wasn't a recruiter that asked that. It was like a proper hiring manager. I think it was like leading the team up or whatever that position was.
Like ethically the right thing versus like doing it the right way.
So you could answer it that way, as in like you can answer it that like obviously if you're gonna write code that puts a lot of legal issues on the matter, then yeah, you definitely shouldn't be doing that. But I think I did well past that stage, sorry, because how I answered it was more like good practices, bad practices. Because like obviously it's a technical interview, so like from that point when you're talking about doing things right versus doing the right thing, doing things right is having good practices. Just make it scalable, make it so that it's readable for everybody, as opposed to doing the right thing. No, sorry, that's doing the right thing. Doing things right. I got this. Doing things right is basically, if you have like a tight deadline and you're kind of cutting corners a bit kind of thing, you're completing your feature at the end. Like you are actually adding a lot of value for the end. But the thing is like conceptually, like it's good temporary. So the way I was looking at it was more like what kind of impact you have in terms of a timeline, like a technical impact in terms of like the short timeline versus the long timeline, and then how it's going to impact other people as you go to it. So I'm not going to dive super deep into like, the back and forth in that, but I think like it was a really interesting question in terms of like, it can be technical if you decide to answer that question technically. And then you'll have these debates on like, you could bring up, then that'll bring up tech debt, but then you'll bring up how it impacts other people on the team. And then, you could kind of elaborate on that. So I thought that was one of the questions where it was like, wow, I'll definitely use it. It sounds simple, but it sounds mind effy as well. But
yeah, I like that question. I think like maybe I wouldn't phrase it in like a philosophy class type way, maybe in a more explicit way. But I like the succinctness of the way that it's phrased. If the person also clarified exactly what they meant by each of those two parts of that statement, because it's a good conversation to have in terms of like trade-offs, in terms of how to execute tasks.
Yeah, so that's always fun. I'll try to dig a couple more of these, but like, those are the kind of stuff that I think from a interviewer's point of view, you kind of have a bit more freedom to ask that kind of stuff. It kind of gauges what other people are doing. Yeah, I think from the point of view of sending out challenges, from the interviewee's point of view, so like we love receiving challenges that are practical and like it reflects exactly the day-to-day life of what your stuff kind of build. How does a interviewer come up with these questions? Like, do they just take a feature that they've built months ago and be like, oh, let's just ask the new candidate to build that? Or what kind of thought behind sending out these challenges usually people go through?
Good question. Like I said, it's pretty hard to like find good problems. I think one way to find good problems is to find problems in the code base or the product that you are working on and simplifying them to a degree where you could solve them within an hour.
Have you seen cases where people just take a textbook of like all the possible like programming problems, just pick one out and be like, all right.
Yeah, that's where the companies that just pick problems off of leak code, like which I've definitely run into as well. I'm just like, oh, yep, already solved this one, a week back. So I'll just like recite exactly what I wrote back then, and those I think are less good problems. But there can be better versions of those types of problems as well, like the ones where I was talking about where there's a natural progression in terms of how far you can get without like a single aha moment in there.
Just because there's like the time dependent factor of like how far they could.
Yeah, like so there's like you could solve just like the most basic version of the problem, and then after that point, how do you optimize it? And after that point, like let's expand like the specs of the problem to see if your code can also handle like the expansion of the specs to see how scalable it is. So those types of problems are also still good.
That's pretty sick. Do you have a favorite question that you've ever asked a candidate, Andy? A technical question, sorry, like a challenge or...
Oh, don't give any of the ones that we do.
Yeah.
Probably FizzBuzz is a good one to ask.
Is it?
Yeah, I've
never understood that.
Yeah, for the people who don't know the actual question, or like just a bit of context of like what are they trying to solve there? What's a FizzBuzz question?
I think it's like you print out the numbers, one's 100, and then you replace some of the numbers with fizz, some of the numbers with buzz, and then some of the other numbers with fizz and buzz, right?
Yeah, if it's like a factor of 3, it's like fizz, factor of 5, buzz. And
oh, that's pretty cool.
Both of them.
And from the interviewer's point of view, what are you looking most of the time on what they're answering?
You can write a for loop.
Exactly, yeah. It makes it like super easy to gauge on like whether they have that like baseline.
How many people, I don't understand like how many people would actually fail this problem. Like for sure not that many, right? Like it can't be filtering out that many candidates because you want a problem that, let's say, like filters out 60% of the candidates like at each stage, like to find like the good ones. Like FizzBuzz definitely wouldn't filter out 60% of like anybody.
When I was interviewing for like a intern at my last company, there were only I think 2 people out of 10 people that applied that were able to complete it.
What?
So you see,
who are these people?
Dude, son, you're living in a bubble, man. Everyone's too smart for you.
Okay, all right.
Everyone's way too smart.
That just makes no sense to me. Like, how are you programming and you can't write a for loop with?
Dude, you gotta set your expectations a lot lower. I'm kidding. Oh, so that's why you have a bias for goddamn Bay Area engineers. I'm obviously kidding. Like, it's actually quite interesting to be.
Well, these guys were in the Bay Area, right? Or are they elsewhere?
They were like Korean. So,
okay,
I don't know if their CS isn't as strong over there, but I feel like it's probably comparable to US. I don't know.
apparently not. If you're only 2 out of 10 pass.
Dude, I think like most of the majority, I don't think it's like a strong 80% of people will succeed this question like right away. I feel like that's way too optimistic. Like if you tell me 50-50, I'd be more than happy that there's a 50% chance that they're not going to do it.
I guess it's a fast problem as well. It's like, I know like when I was interviewing at Uber, at each one of them, there was like a 5-minute problem in the beginning. Like, and then you just like quickly complete it. It seems like maybe it falls under one of those.
But it tests you like if you're under pressure. You could know it, but like if you're going to be under pressure with 5 minutes,
you can't solve
like...
FizzBuzz under pressure. Like, you're not going to work at Uber, like for sure.
All right. I think if anybody's starting, go look at FizzBuzz and like try to do it under 5 minutes. I think you'll at least you'll have fun.
30 seconds. You're done.
Dude, I've never done it. I'm gonna admit I've never done it, so I'll
sure
probably try to do it.
30 seconds.
And then we'll circle back if I don't do it within that time. I'll have a lot to think about. So, yeah. And the other point that I actually wanted to ask was that when you receive a challenge back from a take home, so these are kind of like the more bigger one, like where they actually create their project and then they have like different structure, file structure, all that kind of stuff. What kind of points from an interviewer or like whoever's gauging the applicant, what kind of stuff would you be looking at if somebody sends you these coding challenges? I mean,
well, you do a lot more. You grade a lot more take homes than I do.
I mean, the first thing is just like whether it's not complete. That's usually like a very easy thing to determine.
Specs, like,
does it run?
Exactly. Yeah.
Does it run? Do they meet the specs that were defined? Like, are they careful in terms of reading those?
Yeah, does it answer the question? Like,
you'd be surprised, right? Like some people just copy paste code; they don't know what they're copy pasting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, does a file structure matter much, or this is not the most relevant point for somebody sending in the?
Could be a bonus, like if they do it well. I don't think you should hold it too much against them if it's like a timed challenge. I think another thing that I kind of look for is like proficiency in whatever language or frameworks they're working with. Usually that's not something I hold them against, but if they do really well with one, like it's kind of a plus. Yeah,
I like all the bonus stuff that you're putting out there, because these are the concepts that could make you more distinct than other candidates. For example, like if you're adding in the bonuses, the one that I mentioned previously was adding tests.
Yeah, that's writing tests.
Those are the ones that it's so easy to skip, just because I mean the code runs. It could run perfectly fine and do stuff, but if it runs and you're also confirming that the edge cases, so handling negative values, nulls, and all that, that is always something that is impressive, but it's not like the most complex thing to do. You could do it fairly easy. It's just depending if you want to tackle it. So all these bonus points are really great in terms of sending in these take-home challenges and everything. But yeah, and I think from the last point from a interviewer's point of view is how do you talk to somebody after the challenge phase, which is basically the negotiation phase, like the offer phase. Like from your point of view, how do you gauge how much they're worth, I guess, or how much leeway you want to give them to improve their offer, I guess?
I've never been part of any offer decision. Usually I do stuff before that. Like I'll just interview, but the hiring manager.
I think it's definitely more of a hypothetical question in terms of like what would justify somebody to be like, okay, fine, they're worth the extra that they're asking, or no, they're not worth the extra that they're asking, kind of.
Well, you always want to give them the lowest offer that you can without being like disrespectful.
Yeah,
that's usually
that's like the real,
that's real talk, right?
Yeah.
But then like, I feel like from both parties, like that's always something that should be known. As in, like a lot of times people would come in and be like they're expecting, is like they would assume that's like the highest they're gonna offer to somebody. But a lot of times, like people do expect that there should be some negotiation happening. So whether you're the hiring manager or the applicant, is that the offer going out there is not always the final offer. You should not expect that to be final offer.
Yeah, like there are like a few good hard rules stuff like follow. Like don't tell the recruiter how much you're looking for like before the actual offer. Like wait until they make the actual offer, and then at that point, when you're negotiating, it's good to have a couple other offers on hand, and that way you actually be like, okay, well they gave me this much. Can you bump up your offer? Yeah, those are like kind of like the basics of negotiating.
Yeah, and in terms of like the transparency and like, I feel like the whole point at the end of the day is that like you'll end up on the same team if everything goes well. You know what I mean? Like the whole point is that like you want everybody to be happy and then everybody to be agreeable with the whole thing. Something that we didn't mention actually is that what is included in an offer package. So like as a hiring manager, you could offer a lot of things. Obviously, the salary is one of the things, but there's other stuff that you could include into that to make the appeal to it. So if we could just break that down real quickly in terms of something that you guys have seen, something that could be included in that.
Mm-hmm. Usually there's the salary if you're working for like a startup. If it's like a startup giving an offer, there's stock options if they're pre-public. If they are public, I think usually they give out RSAs or RSUs, restricted stock units. Aside from that, there could be stuff like an education stipends of various kinds, like transportation stipends. There's a lot of other like little things, like whether you get meals anymore.
Have you seen any other more than those ones, Andy?
I mean, yeah, that's basically it. I think in my last job, I had like something added to it where they would pay for my gas money, like driving to and from work.
Transportation stipends. Yeah.
Vacation days also is always a good thing to negotiate.
Oh yeah, a lot of startups now, they don't do like strict number of vacation days, which I think is like a pro and a con, because it's harder to ask for days off and you don't get compensated for those days if you don't take them anymore. But
well, I still think it's not the majority of stuff. Like it's coming, as in like more companies are willing to do it, but I feel like there's still a lot of companies that will have a fixed number and they'll be like, no, you can't have.
That's true. Yeah, at least with like engineers in the Bay Area, I think it's like almost expected now. I haven't seen any or too many job offers that had like a number of vacation days, unless they're like one of the more modern ones that have like flipped and been like, you have to take this many number of vacation days per year. Yeah.
I think, from what I've seen is from different places. I know in London, a lot of companies, they force you to take the days. Yeah. So if you have a fixed amount, I think the standard for like most of the companies is like 28 in a year. That's including your holidays like Christmas and all that. So if you don't use them, they will force you to use it just so that you have them off and everything. So I think I think depending on which part of the world is slightly different. But I think it was really good that we mentioned that you have different options in terms of what your compensation package is included. Sometimes if you have been reached out to and then the whole process goes through, they're also going to have a sign-on bonus where I think like they're literally going to give just a bit of cash straight out so that you join the company. So that is also a thing that could be included into that. So I just wanted to point those out because I feel like any of those points can be negotiated. So salary, you could talk about it, but you can also negotiate on like the stock options. You can negotiate on the actual stocks if ever there's the company is public at the end of the day. You can negotiate your PTOs, the perks, the healthcare benefits. So all those points can be discussed with the recruiter, the hiring manager, the company at the end of the day. So don't miss out on those because they might have a big impact down the road. So yeah, I feel like what's important, we've been talking about this, discussion, try to talk as much as possible. Any final thoughts in terms of like technical interviews after that we've talked about all these kind of stuff, Stan?
No, just don't be an ass. And study up. You'll do fine. There's a lot of tech jobs out there.
Yeah, I like how the people are just listening to this be like, don't be an ass. That's like it's gonna be ringing in there. Andy, do you have any like just final words to people like going into a technical interview or planning to do them?
Yeah, well, once you get an offer, make sure to always negotiate because like the company is going to provide you the lowest that it can. So like it's very rare that they'll give you like the max of what they can offer you at like the first pass. So it doesn't matter what experience level you're at. Even if you have no experience, you should always negotiate.
That's sound advice, and that's definitely going to be for the better of yourself, development, and everything. So I think my last words on these kind of stuff is just basically just talk to not only the company you're talking to, but like just people that like a lot of people in this field, in this industry have gone through this process, and everybody has an opinion on what that is. And if you're not sure about something, definitely just ask it out because you're not going to lose anything from having more knowledge from other people, how they went through the technical process, if they've done well or if they've done bad to it. So anyways, that's the end of the episode of for today, and have a great day, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.